Today we're joined by Ed Monk, who has agreed to address our questions about surviving a mass shooting event. Ed is a retired Army officer, former school teacher, and current law enforcement officer and firearms trainer. He has researched and provided training on the active shooter problem for 16 years. Welcome, Ed. It's a real privilege to have the chance to pick your brain on this problem today.
I appreciate you having me.
You know, I'm always interested about the demographic that an instructional program attracts, and I see from your bio that there's quite a broad spectrum. But when you teach active shooter response and tactics classes, I'm wondering what motivates the students to attend. Have they experienced a critical incident, or has something happened close to them that's kind of brought it to the top of their consciousness? Maybe venues that they go to. Has there been a church shooting? What are people telling you is bringing them to your classes?
Yeah, it's not so much something personal has happened to them or someone close to them, which is often how you get people in just that want to own a gun in their home or to carry a gun for personal offense against a mugger. But what I've found generally is for the presentations that I do, there's just a general interest in the topic and a frustration that why do they keep happening and why can we not do any better at responding to it? Because over the last 21 months, we've had 20 attacks. So we're roughly at one a month. It's getting so frustrating that we refuse to do anything about it. And then I get a surge in requests for presentations after a big attack. So the biggest one was Sutherland Springs church attack was the biggest was the biggest one that I got, with churches asking me to come talk and work with them. And then Uvalde, which is almost 2 years old now. Uvalde was the biggest school event that got schools. My phone rang nonstop for about a week, and I actually have been going nonstop since Uvalde. Don't know why Uvalde did it, and Parkland or Sandy Hook or Columbine or the others didn't. But there's usually a surge in requests for me to come talk about the topic after a big attack, and it's mostly about that venue. So if it's a big church attack, I'll get a lot of church calls. If it's a big school attack, I'll get a lot of school calls. As far as the hands-on training, the firearms training for active shooter response, it's the same. And then they just want to add to their current skill and prep. They may already have a gun for defense. They already may carry a gun in public. But you and I both know that statistically, if we're attacked by somebody outside our home and are forced to use a firearm, the odds are very high that it's going to be a mugger, not the active shooter. And these are completely different attacks. They're different in about 50 different ways that I go over in my classes. So sometimes they just want to come getting better at that, and that's the armed citizen, it's school armed staff, it's armed guards, and it's cops, including school resource officers. And for my instructional level class, it's instructors who already teach it, and they just want to come get more about how I do it, or they want to add active shooter response to their curriculum. So I tell them they can come see what I do and copy it. They can come and do the buffet method, where they take what they like out of it and leave what they don't. So that's usually why the instructors come to that. It's someone maybe who's taken over, they're volunteered to be their church, in charge of their church security team. And so they'll come take it for that reason.
Well, those are all good reasons, and I think that I always have that interest in just the plain, ordinary, decent man or woman who looks at the problem and says, well, what if I do get caught up in this? Maybe they do go to church every Sunday, and Sutherland Springs really raised their concerns about who's sitting beside me, who's sitting behind me. It's all legitimate reasons. And I think that there's always there's a danger when something like that happens and raises our awareness that we may respond in the worst possible way. And that really leads me into a big plus of what you do, and that's the level of research. I was lucky enough to sit through one of Ed's programs at a Rangemaster Tactical Conference, and slideshow after slideshow, number after number. Ed is an amazing number cruncher. I had trouble keeping up. But so I really think a hallmark of your work is that detailed research, and then from that you spin out into developing solutions based on the evidence. Those of us who maybe don't do numbers the way you do numbers, we may come to you with mistaken ideas. We may come to you with ideas, well, if X happens, I'll do this. What kind of myths do you find yourself most commonly telling us, well, no, Gila, that's not really the way it is. Here's how it's going to go down.
Probably the biggest one is that cops are the solution to this. This is a cop problem for cops to solve, And so we just got to get better at cops getting there and cops solving it. And that's what's causing us to get a high victim count. So in 1999, the Columbine attack, where cops just circled outside the school and waited for over 40 minutes for SWAT to show up and deal with it. Supposedly, inside of law enforcement and as a country, we learned a big lesson. The active shooter is not a SWAT problem. Even though the SWAT team is better equipped, better trained to handle a gunfight than the average cop, we cannot wait. Time is killing us. We can't wait on the SWAT team, even though we all admit they are better equipped and trained to handle it than a street cop. We just can't afford the time that it takes to get them there. That was lesson number 1 in 1999. What I advocate is we have to learn lesson number 2, and that is we can't even wait on the cop. It takes 45 minutes to an hour and a half to get SWAT there. We can't wait on that. Well, it's going to take probably 5 to 10 minutes to get a single patrol cop there. That's too much time. If you look at the progress of how active shooters shoot and their shoot rate, they're already into the 20s and 30s by the time the first cop gets there. And unless you're happy with 20 or 30 victim count in an active shooter, we have to stop it earlier than it's possible to get a cop there. So Columbine's lesson number 1 that supposedly we've all learned is we can't wait on SWAT. We can't have SWAT as the solution to the active shooter attack. We now have to learn lesson number 2, which is we can't wait on cops. The intended victims, the people he came there to shoot, are the ones that are going to have to stop this. He's going to shoot at a certain rate, and he's going to get past the number 10, double digits, pretty quick. So if you want a single-digit victim count, which is what I advocate, 0 to 9, when this is over, it's not even a guarantee, but pretty good odds if you can stop him within 30 seconds of the first shot. There is no way you can call somebody who's not already there to get there and stop it within 30 seconds. So you're just left with the people there he came to shoot at. They're the ones that have to stop it. So that's the biggest one, is we keep, get this app on your phone and it'll alert the cops faster. Well, I don't care if it alerts the cop faster. They still got to drive there, get in the building, find him. It's just going to take too long. We could put panic buttons in your room so you can get the cops there faster. It's everything I go to in these conferences for cops and schools. Most of it is how do we get the cops there faster? There's just no mathematical way to win that fight. So that's the first myth that we've got to get away from. The second one, and this is mostly for schools, is that lockdowns are the answer, which is getting a lot of people killed. Lockdowns were not intended for the active shooter. They weren't designed for the active shooter. But we already knew how to do them, so we just took this big round peg and we've hammered it into a square hole. Schools like lockdowns because they're easy to type and they're easy to drill, and they don't make anybody upset. They don't trigger anybody. What do I have to do? Well, pull the shade on your door window, lock the doorknob, turn out the lights, and sit quietly. Well, I can do that. That doesn't trigger me. None of those activities cause me any kind of stress. And they drill really well. And lockdown drills work perfectly every day that the active shooter doesn't show up, and that is 99.99999% a day. So the lockdown drills are great until the active shooter shows up. And we tell students and staff, if you just lock the door and stay in your classroom, you'll be okay until the cops get here and end this thing. Well, in Parkland, for example, he shot 24 people in a minute and a half on the first floor. Total of 24 people in 90 seconds. 18 of those 24 that he shot were inside their classrooms behind their locked doors. He just simply shot from the hallway through the doors of the classrooms and got 18 people inside their classrooms behind their locked doors, where we told them, you'll be safe if you just stay in there and lock your door. Same thing in Uvalde. He shot through the walls and the doors and shot a bunch of people. Multiple attacks I can talk about where he shot through doors or walls. So that's another thing, is the lockdown drills are the answer. They're not. They are on the days he doesn't show up, but they're not good for the days he does show up. So when I retired from a career in the Army, and 10 days later started teaching high school. So I went drastically from one career to another. So I went from a career where pretty much very common, what we did is we planned to do deadly, vicious, ruthless violence against other people, and we fully expected the enemy to try to do that to us. That's just normal day-to-day planning. And I went into public education where we don't want to talk about any kind of violence. Grabbing, punching, shoving, any kind of violence. We're uncomfortable with that. So our training facility here in Arkansas, Last Resort, our classroom is serviced by a septic tank. Well, when that septic tank gets full, I'm uncomfortable dealing with that. So I call a professional. I outsource that problem that I'm uncomfortable dealing with to a guy that has this truck with a pump and a tank in the back. And I call him and he'll come deal with that and I don't have to. But no one's getting hurt in the time it takes him to come out there and pump that tank. But if I flush my toilet at 9 o'clock on Sunday night and it starts backing up, even though a plumber is far more qualified to deal with that than I am, time matters. So I have to get my hands dirty and I have to deal with that. And that's what we're talking about here. Schools don't want to deal with violence, so they want a solution that's comfortable to them, that doesn't require them to do something they're uncomfortable with. And doing deadly, vicious, ruthless violence against another human is uncomfortable to them. So they're looking for stuff like the lockdown drill. Or we're going to build a better fence, a higher fence. We're going to put better locks on the doors. We're going to have security audits. We're going to do risk assessments. I had one school tell us, well, we can't have an active shooter here because we now make our students wear see-through backpacks. So there's no way they can bring a gun into the school. And when I tell them that the Bethel, Alaska shooter rode the bus and walked into his school with a full-length pump shotgun down the pants leg of his jeans, they just blink at me. They think the see-through backpack cures all the problems. Or apps on the phone, metal detectors or panic buttons, all these things they're comfortable. Apps on our phones, heck, 5-year-old kids are comfortable with apps on their phones. So that's the kind of stuff they buy and they pray for, where the only thing that's going to give a school a realistic chance of a low victim count if he comes there is that the school, the people there, are going to have to do vicious, deadly violence against another human. Hardening the buildings is another myth. We have to get better locks, better doors, make it harder to get in the building. Well, that may make sense for certain places, but for middle schools and high schools, 90+% chance your shooter is your own student. He's already in the building. So any hardening of those buildings is probably just going to delay cops and ambulance people, EMS, from getting into your building. We're not thinking it through. We just think better locks, better security. Well, who's the active shooter? We have to understand what the threat is before we start building things to counter that threat. Armed citizens are too dangerous. There's a knee-jerk emotional and political reaction when you suggest armed citizens are the solution to this. But they'll say, no, that's just too dangerous. Well, tell me why. Tell me your evidence. Armed citizens have never shot the wrong person when they've shot an active shooter. Armed citizens have been very successful at stopping active shooters early because they're there. They have a great success rate at stopping active shooters early in the attack with a low victim count. And they've never shot the wrong person while doing it. Now, cops have, I can give you a list, multiple times. Cops have shot by accident the wrong person during responding to an active shooter. 3 times they have shot each other. Cop shot a cop by mistake. 2 of those 3, they died. So armed citizens actually have a better safety track record than cops do. And yet they'll still say, no, citizens can't do it. But they have. And I can show you a list where they've been quite successful. And their hit rate is higher. They have very good hit rates, by and large, compared to cops in active shooter attacks. Gun control is another thing. That's one of the things that's sitting on the shelf. And whenever we have an active shooter attack, the people that already support gun control just use the emotion that comes with an active shooter attack to try to push, because they know they can get laws passed when people are emotional that they can't get passed when people are logical. And what I tell them is, and I can clearly show it, it does not matter what kind of gun the active shooter uses. And of course, people think I'm going political when I say that. The type of gun he uses is not significant, and it's not what we should focus on. What we should focus on is that we let him shoot people unopposed for 5 and more minutes with any kind of gun. Now, guns, if you turned evil, if you snapped and turned evil and went into a big crowded building with a double barrel break open shotgun and a big bag of buckshot, and I let you shoot people unopposed, no one tried to stop you for 5.5 minutes, how many could you shoot? Isn't it 30 or 40 or 50 people in 5.5 minutes with an archaic gun like a break open shotgun? Well, Parkland, he used an AR-15 and shot 34 people in 5.5 minutes. You could have shot 34 people with a couple of handguns, pump shotgun, lever action 30-30. So it's not the type, although they push it, it's not the type of gun. We got to stop letting them shoot us unopposed with any kind of gun. That's the problem. And then mental health.
You talked about that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just said that kind of a new one is mental health. It's people who already want to spend money on more mental health, so they use the active shooter attack. Again, see, that's the problem. We need mental health. And I'm not against mental health, and I'm not saying we shouldn't try to have mental health. But what I ask them is, do you think we had more mental health, more funding in mental health, and more access to mental health in 1960 or 2023? And everybody I've talked to in the mental health end, we by far more funding and more access to it now. Well, how many active shooters did we have in 1960? The 60s versus now. So it doesn't pass the smell test to me that the reason we're having more active shooters now is a lack of access to mental health. And if you look at the shooters like at Isla Vista, the recent one in Maine, Parkland, for instance, had massive mental health care from the age of 8 on, and it just didn't help. But that's the kind of things I see people go to instead of what will really help. And there's only one thing that'll really help us get a low number, and that's we have to be prepared to immediately counterattack and stop the guy.
So you're talking about that 30 seconds and under that gets us, at least holds us to the single digits, and even that is an alarming loss of life. My goodness, I mean, does that mean the teacher in the classroom? Does that mean the deacon in the church pew? Do I even have time to run from the foyer of the church to the place where the shooting's happening? I mean, what do we even have response time if there's a couple of armed citizens in a large church group? Even that becomes an alarming loss of life before somebody can get there.
Yeah, and I get some controversy, some people complain and say, well, you gotta try to end these attacks, and you're not serious until we need to end these attacks. I'm like, well, I don't know. People have been killing each other since 1760, Cain and Abel. People have been. I don't protest that I have the solution to stop murder. Wish I did. I'd make a lot of money if I had a solution to that. So all I got to do, all we could do, all I know to do is we have to end it as quickly as we can after it starts mathematically. He's roughly, a planning factor I offer to people is he's going to shoot somebody every 3 to 5 seconds in the first minute. But then his shoot rate's going to slow the longer we let him shoot, because people are running away after they're shot. They don't count anymore for the statistics. So he's going to shoot somebody every 3 to 5 seconds in the first minute, every 6 to 8 seconds in the second minute, every 10 to 12 seconds in the third minute, and continue to slow down. So the first 2 minutes is quite ugly. But usually, if you can stop him in 30 seconds, you have a good chance. Now, it's not a guarantee. The Dayton, Ohio, the Oregon district in Dayton, Ohio, that guy started in such a crowded place and shot so fast, he shot somebody every 1.2 seconds, that even though very heroic, aggressive cops got to him and shot him down in 30 seconds, he still got 20-something people. But that's kind of an outlier. You still have a fairly good chance if you can get to him within 30 seconds and stop him. Now, that's armed or unarmed. I show examples of successful stopping of active shooters by armed people, both cops and citizens, and unarmed. Armed is statistically much more successful than unarmed, but if you're not armed, if the victims are not armed by law or by choice, then they only have 2 options left, and they are both really bad. So a lot in this active shooter response thing, it's not a choice between ice cream and cheesecake. It's not a choice between 2 great things, and you got to unfortunately choose one and not get the other. This is a choice between 2 horrible things. If you do not have a gun present amongst the victims, then you either have to attack him unarmed, which is not a great option, or watch him shoot a bunch of your people, which is a more horrible option. So you have to take the least bad option, and you have to attack him unarmed. And I show a list of when it can work. And schools, for instance, I have 5 unarmed schools, not colleges. There's also college examples. In schools, 1 was construction workers who happened to be there. The other 4, 2 were students and 2 were staff. So when I talk to schools about being prepared to fight and attack this guy when he starts shooting, you're not suggesting we tell our kids to do this. And I'm like, well, yeah, I am. If you want a low victim count, and look, here's 2 schools that benefited because students reacted the way we hope some people will react, and they stopped it and kept him from killing. The Thurston High School in Oregon, he shot less than 5% of the ammo he had because a student who had been shot rushed and tackled the guy. He had 95% of his ammo left unfired. If somebody had not stopped him, and then cops showed up 8 minutes after he was stopped by unarmed students, my God, how many people would he have shot? It would have been horrible, more horrible than it was.
Well, I think that's inspirational. There's another thing that comes to mind, and I'd be interested what you know about this. We think that especially pistols will bring about a more cataclysmic stop than it actually does. So if there's not an instantaneous stop, is the stop psychological in nature as opposed to physiological? If a citizen or a teacher, person in the church does begin to shoot the murderer, are they just giving up because it's psychologically defeating? Why is that stopping it so quickly?
The armed citizen is stopping it so quickly because they're there. The armed cop, even though they may be just as brave, better trained, better equipped, they can't stop it quickly because they have to be called, radio, they have to travel there and enter the building. So they just physically and possibly can't get there early enough to stop it with a low victim count in most cases, unless the shooter is just very, very slow or terminates very early. The handgun is more than adequate to stop an active shooter. So what we tell students is, I don't care what the active shooter has. I don't care if he has a bazooka, a flamethrower. He can have a nuclear hand grenade as long as he hasn't pulled the pin yet. If you put 3 or 4 or 5 of yours here, or 1 or 2 of yours here, that'll solve the problem. I don't care what the active shooter has. If you have a handgun and you know how to use it and you're willing to use it, that'll stop any active shooter that very likely you're going to come across. Now, what stops them? So here's what I tell cops and armed responders. Just aggressively go to him with a gun intended to find him and shoot him. A whole bunch of good things can happen if we do that. A whole long list of good things. One is, when he knows somebody is getting close or is close that will threaten him with a gun, he'll shoot himself many times. Not all the time, but many times, because they want to end it on their terms, not on your terms. If I'm the active shooter and a cop or an armed citizen comes and aggresses me, and we get into a gunfight, man, I could get blinded, I could get paralyzed, I could get hooked up to tubes in a prison hospital for the rest of my life, I could be crippled, lots of pain involved, too many variables. Clocking myself out with one to the head, maybe a little quicker and a little easier. Plus, I did it on my terms, not on your terms. Sometimes they will have to take a bullet or two before they clock out. Sometimes you have to fight to the bitter end and physically stop their body. Eli Dickin up in the mall in Indiana had to put 8 bullets into his. Several active shooters have taken multiple rounds, but that's fine. Most of us carry handguns that have multiple rounds in them. So what we tell our students in the live fire classes is your first goal after you find him is to put him on the ground. Putting him on the ground is round 1. If you put him on the ground, congratulations, you have round number 1 of this fight. Will there be a round 2? Don't know. But if there is, the shooter is the one that gets to choose. So we show examples of where active shooters shot back from the ground. So just because you put them on the ground and they're on the ground doesn't mean they're still not a threat, or they get back up. So put them on the ground, and then now you're at a bigger advantage than you already were once they're on the ground. If they want to play round 2, then shoot them some more on the ground.
Is all of our attention going on training up for the young person who, and I guess not always a young person, but for the mass shooter who decides to go into a soft target and kill a bunch of people? Are we gearing up to fight terrorism? What are we addressing here, Ed?
As far as a public mass shooting, I would say both. There are some differences, but I would say for the armed responder, the armed citizen, or the cop, you very likely won't know what their motivation is. Whether it's their religious jihad motivation, or their boss fired them yesterday, or their girlfriend broke up with them, or they have some mental thing wrong that causes them to want to go do this stuff. So what we're planning for is someone going into a public place trying to shoot a lot of people to get up a high victim count, no matter what his motivation is. And again, you may not know what the motivation is. But if they are motivated by radical Islam, if that's their motivation, some things you can think about are the chances of multiple shooters goes up just slightly. We've only had 5 multiple shooter attacks in our country. 3 of those 5 were students in middle and high schools, but the other 2 were radical Islam. They will be more aggressive, meaning they will shoot more rapidly than the average active shooter who shoots fairly rapidly. And they will reshoot their victims more than a non-terrorist active shooter who reshoots their victims quite a bit. And they will not, none of them so far, they will not just clock out and self-terminate and shoot themselves to make it easy on themselves. They will either fight to the absolute bitter end, or they will fight very hard to escape if they need to go put whatever they recorded on the internet. But again, you may not know that. You just may know there's a guy with some kind of gun shooting people at the mall, shooting people at your church, shooting people at the elementary school, shooting people at Walmart. You may not know their motivation.
Well, and since research and analyzing these details and then coming to us and saying, well, if you're caught, here's how you survive, here's how you save lives. I guess I am curious about how much importance you assign to details like gender and age of the murderer and their motivations, even racial demographics. I myself tend not to pay a lot of attention to that, but how much do we learn from these past incidents? Even perhaps the gender question, because there was the Tennessee school shooting that I think we were all a little surprised when it was carried out by a female. Do we need to pay more attention to the demographics, Ed?
No. I mean, I know what the demographics are, but if it's a left-handed female that's 76 years old in a mall shooting a bunch of people, then she needs to be shot. If it's a 17-year-old kid in the cafeteria at his high school shooting people, he needs to be shot. It doesn't really matter the demographics, what their race, what their ethnicity, what their age. They just need to be shot. But it's all about math and time. They need to be stopped quickly, regardless of what they are. One thing is, many of them are young, so we need to be ready to shoot a young person. And a lot of, you've trained a lot of people, and we're often told, and we may tell our students, you need to mentally rehearse putting your front sights, or for you Jedi warriors, your red dot. You need to be able to put your sights on, an individual and shoot them. And my bet would be most of us that have mentally rehearsed that process do not think about putting our sight on an 11-year-old kid and pulling the trigger, or a 13-year-old kid. Mm-hmm. And many of these active shooters, especially if they're in a middle or a high school, it's almost guaranteed they're going to be one of the students. So all of us, but especially armed school staff and SROs in schools, and any cop responding to a school shooting, we have to make sure our head's ready to put our front sight on a very young person and pull the trigger, because that's likely, statistically, who's going to be in there.
I'm wondering about if we don't bear the responsibility of, say, that room full of small children, how much does the venue or the location affect decisions to run towards the sound of gunfire, or intending to stop the shooter like Mr. Dickin did, or to barricade, or to run for safety?
Well, regardless of the venue, planning, knowing ahead of time what to expect, I do show some differences. Like, for instance, between high schools, middle schools, and elementary, who the attacker is different, where the start location is different. But that's really in just the planning. Once it starts, very simple. There's 3 possibilities of actions: fight, flee, and barricade. And what we say is there's really only 2 choices, and that's fight and flee. And we put fight first because fight is best for humanity. The best thing for humanity is to stop this attack as early as possible, which means with the fewest amount of lost lives. So if you and I work in an office building together, and all of a sudden we hear popping sounds, and someone comes into our room and says it's this guy Freddie, they fired him at lunch, and he came back after lunch, and now he's shooting the place up. Well, the safest thing for me personally is to go the opposite direction and get as far away from Freddie as I can get. But the safest thing for humanity is, please God, someone shoot Freddie fairly quickly. That will give us the lowest number of victims. So fight is always the first option we want. Now people say, well, I got a 5-year-old in pre-K. You telling me I got to tell my 5-year-old daughter she has to fight? No, that's a good thing about active shooters is they're going to attack a crowded public place. They don't go out in the middle of the woods, the middle of the desert. They start in a crowded public place. So everybody doesn't have to fight. We only need 1 or 2. The place they're going to attack probably has 20 or more, maybe hundreds of people present. We just need 1 or 2. All they needed was Eli Dickin at the mall All they needed was Gina Som at that church. All they needed was Jack Wilson in his church. Now, there were more people there, but that's all they needed. So if you haven't taken a badge and taken an oath, you have no legal obligation or obligation at all. But what's best for humanity is somebody counterattack and stop this active shooter. So we always say fight is the first option to consider, and what you should put in your organizational, school, church, business, office. Your plan is, we want people here, customers, employees, whatever's here, we want them to fight. That's what we would like to happen. No one's obligated, but that's what we want. If you cannot fight or you will not fight, then flee. So my understanding is the farthest away decisions are from each other, the easier they are to delineate under stress. Well, go finding evil and killing it and running away from evil are 180-degree opposites. So it's a fairly easy decision to make under stress. I'm either going to go find this person who's making this noise, and I'm going to stop him, or I'm going to run until I can't hear the shooting anymore. So those are the two options. Either go kill evil or get away from evil. There's a third option. We would say it's not a choice usually, and that's barricade. Barricade is what you do when you don't have a choice. When you cannot or will not fight and you're trapped, you cannot flee, then you barricade, but then even then you need to have a fight plan in case he defeats your barricade. And the problem is, too many places like schools, they start out with barricade. Lock the doors, stay in your classroom, hunker down, do the best you can. You know, in 1999 in Columbine, you can still go on YouTube and listen to the 911 call by that staff member in the library screaming at her kids to get under the tables, keep their heads under the tables, stay under the tables. Well, if we think someone is going to walk into this room that we're in and shoot all of us, getting up under the tables has no survival benefit at all to us. In fact, it probably helps the shooter. That was 1999. Well, less than 2 years ago in Uvalde, when the shooting started in the hallway of that elementary, the teacher in classroom 111 told his kids to get under the tables. 20 years, we're not learning. We keep doing what actually makes the active shooter's job easier. And that's just a huge problem. Fight if at all possible. Plan to fight. Don't say, well, if you're trapped, if you have no other way out, then okay, you have the right to defend yourself. No, we need as a group to fight back and stop this guy. You know, in the last 20 months, there was a church out in California where a brave doctor in the congregation ran at the guy to try to stop him. He got shot down. That didn't work, but then the preacher hit him over the back of the head with a chair. Other people piled on, and so they kept it at a single-digit victim count because they fought back. They didn't just get under the pews and make it very easy to be shot like they did in Sutherland Springs. So fight, no matter where you are. If you're in a Walmart, a school, a church, a mall, your place of business, no matter where you are, the first option everyone should consider is fight. If not, then run. And barricade only if you don't have another option. There are some exceptions, nursing homes, if you have populations that you know fighting and fleeing is not, but you know that ahead of time, so you can really go heavy on barricade as far as the building and gear there.
Yeah, and I think that takes us into probably the most difficult and probably the most individual part of this problem, and that is the person who carries a gun on a consistent basis confronting those questions in their own soul and their own decision making, trying to devise, well, what strategies might be the thing that would let me get to that attacker as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible. I mean, we hear some funny things like, well, you should be able to tell the difference between rifle fire from pistol fire, but then on the opposite side, we hear people saying, well, many times people think that it was fireworks when it started, and so there's this denial question, but then there's also this mental planning that says, how do I get my head right? How do I get myself so that I don't just become a sacrifice on the way, but actually do some good for humanity? As you said, does it make a lot of difference whether we're facing someone with a couple of rifles, whether we're facing someone with a handgun, or how do you strategize what we do based on what we believe them to be armed with?
Again, the big picture, it really doesn't matter. Go find them, positively ID them. Then if you're not already, get within your skill distance. Just because you see them doesn't mean you have to start launching rounds in a public place. And that's a Rule 4 problem that we go into very heavy in all of my live fire classes. We've got huge training scars out there, and that's why you see things, like in Pulse nightclubs where cops shot 172 rounds at that guy and only hit him 7 times. So go find him, positively ID him, but that won't be a problem. The guy holding a gun randomly shooting people in a plugged place, that won't be a calculus equation. That'll stand out to you. Once you find him, then get close enough for your skill level. Now, yours is different than mine. That's different than other people. So in my training, one of the things I do as a fade-back drill is we try to determine for every student, how far back can I guarantee 100% solid center body hits? Not periphery hits, not most of the time hits, but how far back can I guarantee hits? And that's how close I need to get into a public place, unless I have a open, wide, clear shot and I know what my backstop is, which is not normal for inside public shootings. Go find him, get within your skill level, and put bullets into him till he gets on the ground. Congratulations, you've won round 1 of this fight. See if he wants to play round 2. And if he does, put more bullets into him on the ground. So I have a list I show in my presentations where 19 times, a good person, a mixture of cops and armed citizens, with handguns only, stopped an active shooter with a long gun. So if you put 4 or 5 here, or 1 or 2 here, I don't care what the active shooter has. And we're pretty much talking about very low-skilled active shooters. There are very few exceptions. They're generally punks that brought dad's gun to school, to a mall, to a Walmart. Many malfunctions. I can't find one true gun malfunction of an armed responder shooting an active shooter. I have a long list of active shooters with malfunctions because they generally don't know how to run their gun because it's dad's gun or they stole them that morning, like the STEM school. They don't know anything about them. In at least 2 attacks, they couldn't make the first round come out of the gun. Some had malfunctions, did not know how to fix it, couldn't fix it. That's Pulse nightclub. Even though we left him in there for over 3 hours before we went in there and killed him, he only shot for 17 minutes until his rifle malfunctioned to the point he couldn't fix it. So thank God, he only got to shoot for 17 minutes because of a rifle malfunction. But he still got 102 people. So yeah, they're dangerous. They're dangerous, evil people, but they're not Navy SEALs. They're not John Wick. And so often I'll play a video of the San Ysidro McDonald's shooting, which I believe was in 1984. And the first cop got there 14 minutes into the shooting. And he saw that the shooter had an Uzi. And he said, I was outgunned. So all I did was take cover behind a truck. I didn't try to shoot at him. I didn't try to aggress because he had an Uzi. I was outgunned. Well, he had a 38 special revolver. The Uzi shoots a 9mm, ballistically almost identical. So he wasn't outgunned. Well, yeah, but the Uzi holds a lot more ammo. Well, dude, you had 6. If you'd have put 1 or 2 of your 6 here, or 4 or 5 of your 6 here, you'd have ended it. So it doesn't matter what they have. What it matters is, do you have a gun and do you know how to use it? And go shoot the guy. It's terrifying. It'll be stressful and terrifying, but it's actually a pretty simple task. Go find the one person that's got a gun shooting people and get close enough for your skill to guarantee your hits, and just put hits until you win round 1, put him on the ground, and then see if he wants more hits, if he wants to play round 2. So again, I show him, 19.
That's a...
Andy Brown up there in Washington. A great,
yes.
The guy had an AK, and Andy had a Beretta 9mm, and that worked. And he killed him with a Beretta 9mm.
Yeah.
But he had a rifle. I don't care what the guy had. Andy put 9mm bullets in him to the point that he couldn't shoot the rifle anymore, and that's what we need to do.
Well, I think that's real empowering. It almost goes back to those myths that you have to get us past the things that we let take our ability away. When what you're saying is the ability's there. You're not outgunned. As long as you've got a gun, you're not outgunned. Maybe if you don't have a gun, you can still do as Jake Riker and jump the guy. So, we almost go to social rules. There's things that people let hold them back, and to some degree, legislation also, but social rules in particular. Are there things that we're told, say, don't shoot at the 11-year-old child being one that you mentioned a while ago. Don't go through the door that's marked no exit. What social rules are you telling students? Ignore that and go take care of the problem.
Yeah, so I refer to the Seinfeld TV show. In several of the episodes of Seinfeld, they talk about bizarro world. opposite world, where there's this world where everything's opposite than it is here. Well, I call the active shooter day opposite day, or bizarro day. On that day, all the current rules don't apply. Whole new set of rules. So take a school, for instance. Yeah, normally we don't want you to be violent against another human. But on this day, we not only will begrudgingly allow it, we encourage you to not only be violent, but to be viciously, ruthlessly, deadly violent against another human. On other days, we don't want you running off campus without permission. On this day, run like the wind. We'll find you later. We don't care about that. On other days, we don't want you breaking windows. You'll get in trouble if you break windows on other days. But on this day, break as many windows as you need. None of the other rules apply. Saving lives is the only rule that applies, and you can break every other rule. It's like getting caught speeding. Generally, you'll get in trouble for that. But if the cop sees that your kid was bit by a copperhead or a rattlesnake and you're trying to, okay, this is opposite day. You can break rules when things like this happen. And like you mentioned, you're in a restaurant, you see a door that says employees only past this point. Well, on every other day, I'll obey that rule. But if I determine that's my least bad option during an active shooter attack, then I'm going through the door. Well, an alarm will sound. Well, guess what? I won't hear it for very long because I'll be running, and I will not hear that alarm for very long. So yeah, we got to get past the wait on professionals. That's why we have cops to deal with stuff like this. And that's waiting on the cops to deal with it is the reason we still get 20s, 30s, and 40s in the victim count. The thing that violence is never the answer. You know, in many places in America, if your child is on the elementary school playground sitting on a bench during recess reading his Bible, and some bully comes up behind him and kicks him in the back of the head and jumps on top of him and starts beating his face in, and your kid just fights to try to live, they'll both go to the office, they'll both get suspended because violence is never the answer. But Tim Larkin, in his book, has a great quote. He says, violence is almost never the right answer, but very rarely it is the only answer. And on this day, on opposite day, on the active shooter day, violence is the only answer that will get us, that will stop the active shooter before he stops himself. And almost all of them, not all, almost all of them, if they decide to stop themselves, it's way too late in the attack to have a low number. And then, again, the nonviolence. I've been doing this for 16 years, but for the first 14 years before Uvalde, I never got this phone call. But after Uvalde, I got multiple schools calling me saying, Ed, come train our staff how to de-escalate, how to talk the shooter down. And no, I won't do that because it has this chance of success. But that's what they want. They want a solution that can be talked out where no one gets hurt. So that's what they're reaching for. Come tell us how to talk this guy down. The teacher at Parkland, in one of the rooms that got shot in the first, she said if he'd have come into her room, her plan was to stand up and say, I love you. Because she thought surely he couldn't shoot us if we told him we loved him. Yeah, he could. Watch the video of the Ohio active shooter in his sentencing hearing that looks at the families of the people he shot, and he says, you see this hand that pulled the trigger that killed your sons? It now masturbates at the memory of that. F all of you. That's the kind of you're not going to talk that guy out of this. So we have to get, again, it's hard because I jumped straight from being active duty in the Army by like basically a year after I got back from Iraq, going into teaching in public schools where talking about doing violence was unheard of. You didn't do it. That's why we outsource it. I call the septic truck to come deal with my septic tank. They want to call the cops to come deal with violence. And then this is off the topic, but another problem is we got to start carrying where we can carry. Several cases I know of where police officers who could have been carrying in the location of the active shooter attack were not because it's inconvenient. They didn't want to. Who would need to carry there? Well, you never know. You know, that's why we wear our seatbelt. You don't know when you're going to get into an accident. That's why we carry our gun all the time. So I think we have a huge problem in law enforcement with cops not carrying routinely off duty. There's no way to measure it. The only way I know that we could try to measure it is with a survey, and I think people would not be truthful. But then armed citizens need to carry. Now, again, if you haven't taken an oath, I'm not telling anybody you must go to an active shooter. I don't know who the saying was, but you're not required to widow or orphan a member of your family in an attempt so that someone else is not widow or an orphan. But there's many people that would, so we just have to start carrying in places that we can carry so that we can stop these things for those who would act in with a few number. And this is a buy one get one free. If the active shooter thinks I can start the attack here but it won't last long, he's not going to start it there. He's going to go somewhere else. So having a response plan, trained, resourced, war gamed, and ready to stop the attack quickly, buy one get one free. You also get deterrence with that if the shooter knows that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you talk about carrying where you're allowed to. Doesn't mean that you have to go take action, but wouldn't it be nice to have that alternative? You might not have the alternative to run away. Wouldn't it be nice to have the alternative to fight back when you needed to? And that comes to the inconvenience of putting a gun on every morning, of wearing cover garments, of all those things. And nobody said it was ever easy. And frankly, there's some responsibilities that go along with it that are sometimes fairly unpleasant. But wouldn't it be nice to have that choice if it comes to it? Well, Ed, I could talk to you for hours, but I never know in these kinds of interviews, have I asked the right questions? Are there topics that you wish that we'd gone into? Are there things that I should have asked you that I didn't? What would you like network members to take away from our time together here?
There's just one big thing that I stress a lot because of network members. I know they carry, or maybe I'll throw two in. One is, again, we mentioned it, statistically, most likely, should you have to shoot somebody outside your home, the odds are it's going to be a mugger who's someone 2 to 4 yards away from you. The active shooter is more likely to be much farther away and has a good chance of having a higher level gun than you have. So when you're choosing the gun that you carry every day, the gun that's minimally adequate for the mugger may not be minimally adequate if you want to go up against an active shooter. So just if you say to yourself, I think I'm likely to actually take action and stop an active shooter if I'm in a place where it happens, just do a double check on your gear and make sure it's adequate for that. I'm not saying I couldn't stop an active shooter with my LCP or my North American Arms 5-shot single action, but I wouldn't want to do that. And the last thing I'll leave you with is Rule 4. Everybody trains the gun safety rules differently, but our Rule 4 is be sure of your target and what's in line with your target. And we talk about this and we beat it into people's heads, and if you're an instructor class, by golly, you have a test question, you got to know those things. And then we go out to the range and we completely eliminate them. Everybody gets on a line. The range Nazi doesn't let anybody out in front of you. The only thing out in front of you is your target and a big wall of dirt behind your target. So on the range, we talk about hits and misses. And the worst thing a miss can do is embarrass you a little bit and maybe make you not pass a shooting test. But it doesn't ruin anybody's lives. And in most police qualifications, I haven't seen a police qualification yet that required 100% hits. So we have to change gun training and have to start looking for 100% hits. And I get a lot of complaints here online, a lot by other instructors. Ed, 100% hits is unrealistic, dude. Okay, your 14-year-old daughter is in the cafeteria of her school when an active shooter kicks off in that cafeteria, and a resource officer or an armed staff member comes in there to stop it. What percentage of hits would you like them to get? And of course, it's by God 100% because my 14-year-old daughter's in there. Well, we can't accept 80% police qualification or any other kind of test and demand 100% under severe stress. So we have to start doing that. And the problem with Rule 4 is you can't know. You can know on a range. You can look at a big wall of dirt and say, my bullet's stopping there. But if you see an active shooter and you see nobody in front of him and nobody behind him inside of a building, how do you know that there's not people on the other side of that wall? And most walls and buildings are not ballistic. They're not going to stop your bullet. So yeah, I may see an active shooter in front of me within my range and nobody behind him and a wall behind him. There may be a classroom full of kids on the other side of that wall. So you can never really know, I think in most cases, if Rule 4 is safe, meaning the backstop. So what fixes it is 100% center body hits with good hollow points in our pistols. And then if there are people back there that we didn't see because we were so focused on the shooter, or because they're hiding behind clothes racks in Walmart, or they're behind the wall, even if there are people behind him, they're at minimal risk if we put all of our hollow point pistol rounds in the center line of the body, 100%. So I think rule 4, we got to stop just having on test and talking about in the classroom, but actually start teaching. And one of the problems is in most of our shooting in classes we go to, the instructor says shoot this many rounds in this line, this many rounds at this line. Police qualifications the same way. Where in a gunfight, you decide how many rounds, you decide from where. So if you find the active shooter 35 yards away, maybe I can't hit at that distance, so I have to get closer. So that rule 4 thing, I think we need to pay a little more attention to. And it's not just active shooters, it's in all shootings, but for the mugger, it's 2 to 4 yards away. So the ability to get hits is not nearly the problem compared to the distances that most armed responders are going to find an active shooter. So that's what I'll leave you.
Well, that's thought-provoking, and what viewers need to understand is we have touched on such a small fraction of what Ed packs into one of his seminars. And I've not had the privilege of going out on the range with you, Ed, but I have been in your classroom, and it's almost an overwhelming amount of information. And so what I'm going to leave our viewers with is, if you see notification that class that Ed is teaching is coming to your region, don't wait, sign up for that. Ed told you how busy he is and how tightly he's scheduled. These classes fill, and it's very much worth the time and expense. Remember also, he'll be a speaker and trainer at the NRA annual meeting in Dallas in May, I believe you said, the Girl and Gun Conference and the ILFE conferences. So anyone who's going to be at any of those venues, don't miss the chance to hear this man speak. It's inspiring, it's sobering, and it's evidence-based. So Ed, thank you for doing what you do. Sometimes I think you've been the voice in the wilderness, but we need to hear those messages, and please know that we very much appreciate what you do.
Well, thank you for having me on. Anybody that wants to host me for a presentation, I go all over the country doing them. All we need is a venue, an audience, and funding, and an open day on my calendar, and we can do it.
Well, Ed, thank you for sharing your time with us today. I know you're a busy man, and it means a lot. This will be very good for our members to have access to you and this information. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.